Welcome to Pickwick Monthly, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and my Pickwickian co-host for today is Jacob Romanow. Hi, Jake.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to have you on the show this month. You were supposed to be the last month, and we had to make the old switch.
Yes, excited to be here at last. Glad you're feeling better.
Thank you for the long wait to make your debut on Pickwick Monthly. Everyone, for the next 20 months, we're talking about Charles Dickens's The Posthumous Papers of the Pickwick Club, as it was first serialized in monthly parts from March 1836 to October 1837. And once a month, myself and one of a rotating set of co-hosts talk about each serialized part for 20 straight months. Along the way, I'll share some of the items in the Rosenbach's collections, our complete serial issues of the Pickwick Papers, a portion of the Pickwick Manuscript. We have many first editions by Dickens, the earliest surviving literary manuscript of Dickens, letters, ephemera, and a lock of Dickens's hair. I've got to get that on the show somehow. I don't know how I'm going to do that. But today's episode, number 4, chapters 9 to 11, Let the Wellerisms Begin. Samuel Weller joins the cast of characters, and Pickwick reads a chilling tale, a madman's manuscript. That's going to be fun to talk about. If you're watching live right now, please like and subscribe and have fun in the live chat. And if you're watching the recording, still like and subscribe, and you can leave comments or questions below. My co-host for today is Jacob Romanow. He is a scholar of 19th century British literature and culture and is currently visiting assistant professor of literatures and English at Bryn Mawr College. His research focuses on literary form and developing concepts of privacy and nationhood in the Victorian period. And he has published on Anthony Trollope, William Wordsworth, and other 19th century writers. He has also taught Dickens in courses at Rutgers University and led seminars at Dickens Universe. I'll ask him about that too. And he is delighted to be returning to Pickwick, as he put in his bio. I am delighted to have you here, Jake. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Do you have a memory of first time reading Dickens, and also a first time reading Pickwick?
Well, it's a good question. It was in the water growing up. I had Oliver and Christmas Carol and these sorts of mass cultural exposures to Dickens in the way that I think many people do, where you feel like you know what it is before you encounter it, before you know it. I read Dickens for real for the first time, I think in college. I read Great Expectations. I loved it. But I didn't read Pickwick until later, let's see, I think it was when I was applying for graduate school, and I was trying to sort of get myself situated, and I thought, I should start at the beginning, of course, which is a completely questionable way to read through Dickens, but
I did that. That was my plan. But I skipped sketches because I figured most readers first encountered him with Pickwick and then sketches.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But even having the sort of limited experience that I did, and I had read a couple other things by that time, I was really Pickwick is really a beast unto itself, and in a way that I found really sort of delightful and eye-opening. The sort of serialization works so differently here, right? These almost separable units, these stories that are so self-contained, and yet that creates this sort of kaleidoscopic sense of this universe where the next thing could happen and the next thing could happen.
Yeah.
And I loved that. I loved the sort of metafictional play of the posthumous papers conceit, these interpolated tales of which we have such a major one today, and the humor that is so foregrounded.
I'm sure there's issues later that don't have interpolated tales, but I don't know which ones. And so far, it's all of them have an interpolated tale. So,
Well, and of course, even the non-interpolated tales they work the same way, right? I mean, it's you could excerpt any portion of this novel, I think, really effectively. And I've had colleagues who have in their teaching. I've never taught Pickwick, but coming back to it for this is making me want to.
yeah. And you mentioned that kaleidoscopic effect, that, way that it just, and it is what do you call, picaresque, in that, these individual adventures that are only lightly tied together. He changes that in later. I mean, Oliver is more cohesive, and Nicholas Nickleby and on, but it only slowly changes. And this is the one that's most open to just being a series of adventures. You also taught at Dickens Universe. Tell everybody what Dickens Universe is. Not everyone may know that.
Yes, Dickens Universe is an incredible annual extravaganza. It's a week-long Dickens experience at UC Santa Cruz. They host it every year, and they pick one Dickens novel each year, sometimes a novel and a paired sort of other text. I believe this summer they're doing A Tale of Two Cities out there. The year I went, it was Little Dorrit, but it is a sort of intensive, everybody reads it. It's academics, it's members of the general public, it's Dickens fanatics, it's Dickens novices who are excited for a vacation in California. All are welcome, and there's lectures and seminars and discussions and cocktail parties. And it is the most sort of delightful, intensive, deep dive into one novel where you really work through and think through and talk through every piece of the underbelly of a novel that, of course, always really can stand it. Dickens novels can take that kind of investigation and that kind of play and that kind of community building. And it's a marvelous experience. It's really pretty unique, I think, in the way that it brings together academic and non-academic Dickensians in that kind of an intensive way. It's a great time, although of course it's an intensive, it's not like this where you can watch whenever you want.
Dickens is one of those authors that has this great, interplay between non-academics and academics, and it's great that there's spaces like this. I know the fellowships work this way too, where there's great spaces where people can really come together and explore and not feel this kind of sense of exclusion that the academy can do sometimes. And I've always wanted to go. As a matter of fact, I was even close to going, in that I was really thinking of doing it, and the pandemic hit. And then it didn't happen, and I'll eventually get back out. They did, although I did participate in their virtual sessions that they did. So I got to go in a sense because it was virtual. Well,
and Santa Cruz is its own attraction. It's so beautiful out there, the redwoods and the coast and the boardwalks.
Yeah. We may have some Santa Cruz people watching the show. I know I've been in touch with people. I know some have. I just don't know if there's any watching live right now. But one of these. What novel were they doing when you went?
Little Dorrit.
Okay. The one that I haven't read yet. The one I'm saving. So that one I can't go to. So
that's right.
That again.
Although it could be a good way to do it.
That would be a good way to do it. An intensive experience for the first time. But I just feel like I got a few more years left in me. So,
gotta save it up.
I hope I'm not gonna, kick off anytime soon. I really want it for later. So we'll see. I don't know how long I'll be able to wait. Well, that's great, Jake. I'm glad you can join us for this one. And we are about to start number 4. In Dickens's life, in June 1836, what we got before Dickens is that this is for the first time readers of Pickwick in June 1836. This is the first time they've seen Phiz illustrations, Hablot Knight Browne illustrations. You remember the issues begin on the covers. At the bottom, it said with 4 illustrations by Robert Seymour. and he's kind of the originator of the thing anyway. And then it was changed after he died with illustrations by R.W. Buss, and that lasted for one issue. So when Phiz comes aboard, the publishers are not putting his name on. It's just with illustrations. Like, who knows? This guy might not last either. We may decide we want someone else.
Fool me once, shame on you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now it's just with illustrations. But he does wind up, staying on board. And not only for this, but Phiz winds up being the illustrator for many Dickens serials after this, and chose the name Phiz to kind of go with Bose. So it was Bose and Phiz, although Buss was perfect. Robert W. Buss was perfect because it was Bose and Buss, or Boz and Buss. But Hablot Knight Browne, just getting started as an illustrator, and that was part of what they wanted. Dickens especially, I think, didn't want he didn't want like a Crookshank, a very well established illustrator with his own kind of audience who was going to get to drive what happens in this serial. Dickens needed to be in control, and it worked out best that way. But we'll see. We'll take a look at the first two illustrations that everybody would have seen. And I say the first two that the first people would have seen, because last week we saw Phiz illustrations, because then after he's in the driver's seat as the illustrator, he goes back and redoes the two illustrations from number 3, the two that and redoes those anyway. So then all future printings, and by future printings I mean any reprintings that were occurring during the original run. So if they're reprinting issue number 1 while it's still running, they replace the illustrations with Phiz. So there were people even in 1830, later in 1836 and 1837, who never saw the Buss illustrations, that they just didn't get those very early copies that had them in it. So Dickens at the time was also in June and throughout the summer, he was working on a comic operetta, a little play. Dickens, everybody knows he wants to be an actor. Not everybody knows. Maybe you don't know. Dickens really wants to be an actor, right? And it's just, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's just before Pickwick is when he even has an audition for one of the major theaters. I can't remember, and comes down with a bad cold, and so cancels it or postpones it, and then in the meantime he winds up selling pieces, or Pickwick happens, and then he never returns to that. Dickens wanted to be on the stage, but the writing career took off, is the takeaway here. I don't know about the timing exactly. And always interested in theater. Held private theatricals, did tours, all kinds of things. But also he seems very interested, as Jake, it seems almost every 19th century novelist also wants to be a playwright at some point.
It is certainly a trend.
Yeah, and most of them fail. At least
Thackeray tries, Trollope tries, James tries, without much success.
And Dickens, I mean, I've read his, Village Coquette is the one he's working on now, and The Strange Gentleman, which he adapts from another story. They're not very good. They're enjoyable, but in a weird, it's just like this light little fun thing that Dickens has put together. It's probably got more to do with the fact that Dickens wrote it, that I can find more in it than I would if someone else had written it. So he's working on that at the same time, thinking that'll be a good route for him in life, to also be a playwright. He's also a reporter still for the Morning Chronicle, and he's covering the trial of the Prime Minister right now. The Prime Minister has been put on trial by a man who has accused him of adultery with his wife, which is just strange the way the legal system works, because it's within the house, and it's like he's putting him on trial. the supposed victim here. I won't say anything about that this week. I want to mention it because that's what Dickens is doing right now. As a reporter, covering a trial isn't just taking notes and then you write up a little story. It is in shorthand, taking down every single word. You're a court stenographer is what you are as a reporter. And this is how he learns his shorthand method as a reporter. And he has to take down just page after page for hour after hour after hour of this trial. The actual what happens here, this adultery trial and someone being accused and the result of it does seem to have maybe some I get this from Michael Slater's biography of Dickens. Slater posits, and I think it's probably true just because of the timing of everything here, that what happens in this trial has a little bit of influence on what will happen to Mr. Pickwick in succeeding issues. And that's all I'll say now. So.
And of course, that stenographer shorthand format has some structural influence on some of these sort of transcriptions of accent and of dialect, and even the jingle sort of way of speaking, I think.
Yeah, that Dickens has to be hyper aware of patterns of speech and diction and the way people's kind of I don't know, idiolects or however we would describe them, their own very personal way of speaking. And if he needs to be able to figure out a way to capture that and then, to then rewrite it later. It must have been enormous help for him to be a reporter in this sense. Well, this issue is also, and you guys don't have it in the University of Victoria Library copy that I share with people digitally because the Rosenbach copy of the complete serial is not digitized. You don't have this in that copy because later printings had things and some didn't have some things. But this is the issue that in the very first edition, and this is not a first, this is a facsimile if people are just jumping in. I bought this Easton Press facsimile edition, has the Pickwick Advertiser. This is the first issue where they've had it already on the cover. Last month, there were a couple inserts of things for Sunday Under Three Heads and something else. There's some books listed on the back and on the inside, but they finally decided the Pickwick Advertiser, 4 pages of, and they're all book advertisements in this one, that will, then grow this Pickwick. And I'm going to read all these books, well, maybe not Germany in 1831. I don't know. That sounds a little dry, but I'm sure it would be interesting, coming from looking at it today, especially the Duke of Wellington's Dispatches, compiled by Lieutenant Colonel Gurwood. That would be fun. All righty. 4 pages that will grow in number 10. There's 14. In number 24, in the last issue, there's 24 pages of the Pickwick Advertiser. So as they go on, they realize, hey, everybody, give us some money and we'll advertise. And the publishers can make even more money doing this. So so that's the way this one starts, with the first time the very first readers are seeing advertisements for other books. And then they're reading this and on to the issue. Should we begin? All set. We left the last issue that Jingle has tricked Tracy Tupman into not paying attention to Rachel to get the scent off. And at the same time, Jingle has started wooing Aunt Rachel, and said that Tupman doesn't love you. So then she interprets him ignoring her as he doesn't, and then and Tupman thinks that Jingle is helping him, and is also given Tupman's also given Jingle £10. So, all righty, take a sip first. By the way, this is the special Bloomsday brew from Attic Brewing Company. They made these for Bloomsday for the Rosenbach this year, and they're absolutely delicious. It's a hazy pale ale. And if you go to Attic Brewing online, they're still selling them. So it's a small batch. They won't be available forever, but it's absolutely delicious.
And there are a couple of Pickwick allusions in Ulysses.
Yes.
And I really think even the sort of Jingle speech has some kind of ancestor relation to some of what now gets sort of simplistically described as some of the stream of consciousness moments in that novel.
Yeah, I'll have to go into that because I mean, because Joyce's Ulysses is so full of all kinds of references. I do know that there's some Dickensian ones in it, but it's been so long since I've seen them. I'll have to go back and do that. It also happens in the Wake. Finnegan's Wake is filled with allusions to all kinds of authors. But thanks for that reminder. Now I have to go and find out, what exactly is there. So, all right. But for Dickens's Pickwick Papers, we'll start with chapter 9 here. And that begins, it's called A Discovery and a Chase. And the Rachel and Jingle are suddenly missed at supper. Everyone's having supper. And I like the idea of this too. Everyone's having supper. It's 11 o'clock at night. It's past 11 o'clock at night. Yeah, that's my kind of meal system. Okay. Where you have your dinner earlier, but supper could go as late as 11 or 12. And it's not unusual that I'm sitting up here in my study and I'm like, I suddenly go downstairs and I have to bring up practically a whole meal to get me through the night. So I like that. But they are missed. Where's Rachel? I and Jingle. It's past 11. It says Mr. Tubman.
They're not eating yet, right? They're sitting down to eat and they notice they're gone.
Yes.
And they say, well, they'll come, they'll show up. We're not going to wait for dinner. We can't wait for dinner. Of course, 11, they've already been waiting a while. But I think that's a great comic bit, right? They recognize the problem, but you got to put it aside until they get fed.
Wardle says, I never wait supper for anybody. Excellent rule that, said Mr. Pickwick. Admirable. And before that, Tupman is like laughing in his sleeve. He thinks they're off somewhere, helping his plot to achieve her. Perhaps Jingle's playing the Cyrano for him and wooing her for him. Like Tupman's completely fooled by all this. But that idea too of like Wardle never waits, and then out comes a gigantic round of cold beef. That there's a sentiment that pervades this book, and probably most of Dickens, but certainly Pickwick, is that food and feasting and drink are so important to the pleasures of life. Like characters mention this kind of thing frequently. It's not a necessity. It is it is something that it's not just like a nutritional necessity. These characters need to enjoy themselves eating and drinking. And
on the character level and also on the sort of cultural level, right? Yeah. Roast beef is the British identified food, right? The old song, roast beef of old England. And there is that sort of sense here too, especially with the coaching stuff that's about to follow, of a kind of enunciated Englishness that is connected to that ability to take pleasure that Dickens is so committed to building up.
Yeah. And now the real comic moment is they're just about to eat and they get interrupted. The Pickwick is on the very point of opening his mouth for the reception of a piece of beef, and Wardle's got his knife in there to carve, and they're interrupted by one of the servants who comes running in and says that Jingle and Miss Rachel are gone. In a post which I guess is a post chaise from Blue Lion Muggleton. I was there, but I couldn't stop him, so I run off to telly. Tupman's response is, I paid his expenses. He took 10 pounds from me, which is funny that he's not. But of course, it's a secret that he's in love with Miss Rachel, so he can't tip that yet. So his first reaction is, he swindled me. I won't bear it. I'll have justice. And is so crazy that they start to wonder, why is he going so crazy over this, over 10 pounds? Well, because he's in love with her. And he's been jilted. They have eloped. Wardle thinks immediately that Joe, the fat boy, has been in on this, because Joe has already spread the story about Tupman and Miss Rachel kissing in the arbor. And so now Mr. Wardle thinks that was a subterfuge by Jingle, maybe, so Jingle can then run off with her. And poor Joe is, not at fault here. But he says he was bribed by that scoundrel Jingle to put me on the wrong scent, and then he tries to attack him. But he is saved. It is a beautiful sight. You want to read the opening that?
It was a beautiful sight in that moment of turmoil and confusion to behold the placid and philosophical expression of Mr. Pickwick's face, albeit somewhat flushed with exertion, as he stood with his arms firmly clasped round the extensive waist of their corpulent host, thus restraining the impetuosity of his passion, while the fat boy was scratched and pulled and pushed from the room by all the females congregated therein. He had no sooner released his hold than the man entered to announce that the jig was ready.
Pickwick, Mr. Pickwick to the rescue. And again, this happens again and again, this hyperbolic language about Pickwick and some kind of heroic thing. All he is just grabbing Mr. Wardle, around the waist. But the sight of him, it's the sight of this, big Pickwick trying to wrap up big Mr. Wardle to prevent him from getting to the fat boy,
who is nevertheless getting scratched, pulled, and pushed,
yes,
as much as anyone needs to.
So by all the females in the room. So he gets beat up anyway, as they're trying to get him out. Well, that's okay. As you said, the jig has arrived and they're out the door. They jump in and they go to the Blue Lion. I love how they pull up to the Blue Lion right away. They just pull up and Wardle just shouts, "How much are they ahead?" Like they all know what he's talking about, which is, the coach that's carrying, Jingle and Miss Rachel. To the little crowd there, "Not above 3/4 of an hour," was everybody's reply. "Chasing 4 directly, out with them, put up the gig afterwards." And they're, ready to go get them. The chase, we get a chase, and it's not Steve McQueen bullet chase, but we'll get a crash and we get all kinds of things going on.
Chase and a chase.
Yeah. Yes. Every part now has something to do. The characters are in coaches and traveling around. Well, I mean, it is a traveling book, so that's the method of travel for this age. Dickens is writing about an age before railroads, but he's writing about it during an age when the railroads have already started to come in, and which will overtake over time, everybody, the travel that'll happen. But this whole, idea of coaching in that day is so nostalgic for Dickens. Even as you and I were talking about before the show, it's like, I don't know how you can be nostalgic about a method of travel that had to be the most uncomfortable method of travel devised. I mean, you hear real accounts from people about how painful it is to ride in a coach. I mean, they do develop shock absorbers at one point, but even then, it is a rough way to travel. I just got this book last summer, and I had posted about it today on our Pickwick Facebook group, and even there, just trying to show the size of it is a little hard to get. but this is the Coaching Days of England book. This is how big it actually is. And so when you open it, it's twice that size, and there's these gorgeous plates in here that you get, full sized, that are really beautiful. But this book itself, and there's a Pickwick section in here too, a little chapter with some quotes from one of the later chapters. But it's this book itself too is a kind of nostalgic look at these days with these beautiful coaches, and they're beautiful coaches and riding through the countryside, which could be wonderful. And
importantly, it's a recent nostalgia, right? It's
for Dickens, it's like 10 years ago.
and even as the railroads begin to proliferate, there's large swaths of the country that don't have them yet. So this is still happening. It's just an increasingly anachronistic phenomenon. And so there's this sort of sense of something being lost that is being captured and put forward for us here.
And we'll get a little bit into that a little later when they arrive at especially at the White Hart Inn. Some of the the prose in there, Dickens is talking about that. So so they all get and it's always this tumult, this rush to get going, away ran the hostlers and the boys, the lanterns glimmered, the men ran to and fro, the horses' hoofs clattered on the uneven paving, the chaise rumbled as it was drawn out of the coaching house, all was noise and bustle. And it's like Jingle talking here. Here's one little paragraph. Out came the chase, in went the horses, on sprang the boys, in got the travelers. I mean, that's what Jingle would, say at this moment. So the bustle of Jingle's speech is overtaking the narrator here.
And of course, Pickwick is completely lost. He's trying to keep on top of everything. Yo. He doesn't know what he's saying yo to.
Yes. And that's as they're galloping away, yo at the first boy, yo at the second, yo chimed in old Mr. Wardle. I mean, this is like for a Philly kid. This is like, I understand what you're saying. Other people might be confused, but it's actually not that simple. It is, and then Pickwick says it too, right? Taking up the burden of the cry, though he had not the slightest notion of its meaning or object. They do these, I guess, from the text, it seems like this is what you yell when a turnpike gate perhaps is coming up, or maybe you have to stop and you're going very fast, maybe. So that's what happens here, is that they're all yelling yo, like they're in the cast for the Rocky musical, and then they pull up to the turnpike gate. And in my giant Coaching Days book, there is an image. There is a print of a turnpike gate, which is right here, which I like very much. And this is like the scene, except there's too many people here. It's, the old guy has to come out, and it's raining, of course, in our story. But the old guy has to come out. He's been in bed. He's just in his night clothes and his nightcap, because someone has to come up and he has to open the gate to let them continue on the road. And that system of, the turnpike houses, and they get no help from him there, right? He doesn't tell them anything. But that whole system of paying the tolls. This is a whole turnpike system that has been put in place throughout England, and sometimes it's controlled by a central place, but some boroughs or smaller places are in control of their own. And the money he collects, it's just like the tolls you get on a highway. It is just for the upkeep of the roads, and they have to just trust that this turnpike gatekeeper is going to report all of the money, and how easy it is to just slide.
I wouldn't want to rely on this particular turnpike keeper if I were the state.
Yeah, what does he say? You know, you know, how long ago were they here? An hour? I dare say it might be. Or 2 hours? Well, I shouldn't wonder if it was. And then, they call him an idiot and leave. And then he's like, idiot, you paid me. What does he say? Like, idiot, you paid me and had to wait. You've lost 10 minutes here and gone away as wise as you came after all. So, and cost you a guinea. So there, and of course, people too, it would cost you more money, and that in a post chaise and four with 4 horses would have cost more than if you were in, say, a cart drawn by 2 horses or something even drawn by 1. You pay the bigger your vehicle, the more you pay. Just as it happens today with trucks, semi trucks pay more per axle on the highway for tolls. Well, they get through that obstacle, and then the storm hits. Then they arrive at another one of the stages, horses on directly, and meaning they're going to stop at another staging area to change horses. Just as we have to stop at the, to get gas in the car, they had to stop to change horses after a certain amount of time, or you would have literally killed your horse. Especially if you're, going fast and at a full gallop. So they stop and change horses, and then they have a long stretch in a storm, right? Stage was 15 miles long. The night was dark, the wind high, the rain pouring in torrents. And finally, they catch up and they see Jingle. First they hit another stage, and then they ask if he's been through. Tall gentleman, dress coat, long legs, thin body. Yes. Elderly lady, thin face, rather skinny. I'm sure Aunt Rachel's not pleased with this description of herself. Elderly lady, thin face, rather skinny. What? And they've been through. So now they know that they're gonna catch up. They're not far behind. Quarter of an hour, so 15 minutes behind is all they are. Well, they head in. It's uncomfortable. Pickwick says, I never did feel such a jolting in my life, said Mr. Pickwick. I can imagine full gallop in these, coaches with, even if it's, I don't know if we're at the time when these some kind of shock absorber system has been developed, but it doesn't matter. Like running down the road in the middle of the night.
We know this is not a especially well put together coach either.
Yeah, in a storm. This has got it, but there they are. Here they are.
They missed supper.
Yes. They haven't even eaten second supper. They haven't had yet. Here they are. Mr. Pickwick thrust his head out of the window. Yes, there was a chaise and 4 a short distance before them, dashing along at full gallop. And then it's Mr. Pickwick was not mistaken. The countenance of Mr. Jingle, completely coated with mud, thrown up by the wheels, was plainly discernible at the window of his chaise. And then another thing, like the mud flying in on you all the time, right? And the motion of his arm, which was waving violently towards the postilions, denoted that he was encouraging them to increase the exertion. Now it's a chase, right? 2 cars, 2 coaches chasing each other, galloping down a road in a storm. Sudden bump, loud crash, away rolled a wheel, and over went the chaise, and Pickwick and Wardle crash. We get we'll have an illustration in just a second. This will be the Phiz illustration for this. But the way it's described is plunging of horses, breaking of glass. Mr. Pickwick thought himself violently pulled out from among the ruins. The post boys are, a little dirty. Mr. Wardle's without his hat, his clothes torn. But the whole thing, this would have to be horrifyingly scary if it actually happened. And this doesn't seem that scary. And also, let's share the illustration and talk about it while we're doing it. Because because this is in the serial, which I will share. There we go. I would think that, knowing Dickens, he's going to go for either how terrifying it is or how funny it is, and we don't get that much of either in the text. Do you agree with me? Maybe I just want more always. Give me more, Dickens.
Yeah, it happens at the end of the chapter. It's kind of, we don't get a lot of payoff. The laugh he plays it for is the laugh of Jingle's response, right?
Yeah.
Which, in fairness, is a laugh.
Here's Jingle up here looking out the window, laughing at them because they've just crashed. I
think it's funny that he doesn't. He's such a sort of melodramatic villain in this moment that instead of continuing and escaping at the end of this chase, he can't resist a little bit of
yes,
coming back to rub it in their faces.
What does he say? Read that. I say,
where are we? Hello, anybody damaged? I say, she's very well, desires her compliments, begs you won't trouble yourself, love to Tuppy. Won't you get up behind? Drive on, boys.
And that's what gets Mr. Pickwick angry. Nothing in the whole adventure, not even the upset, had disturbed the calm and equable current of Mr. Pickwick's temper. The villainy, however, which could first borrow money of his faithful follower and then abbreviate his name to Tuppy, was more than he could patiently bear. He drew his breath hard and colored up to the very tips of his spectacles as he said slowly and emphatically, "If I ever meet that man again, I'll..." Tuppy is what puts Mr. Pickwick over the edge here. So,
well, and I think it's a brilliant moment too, because Pickwick has no idea what's going on. Right? Pickwick doesn't know that Tupman has this love interest. He doesn't really understand what's going on with the coach, right? He doesn't know what the yo-yo-yos are. He's just been kind of dragged along to this fight. And it seems to me to be a little bit, to take him seriously for a moment.
yeah.
He's excited to have something to latch onto, to get into the spirit of this whole thing. Aha, like now I can be mad. Everybody's so mad about something, and now he's calling him Tuppy. Here we go.
Yep. And he finally gets mad. So the humor comes at the end. And what I'm saying about the no humor, like, this could have been described as like when it crashes and Pickwick flies into the air, and like he could have made much of it. And Dickens doesn't want to seem to, maybe he doesn't want to have to deal with the fact that this could be dangerous, and I don't really want to deal with that right now. Later in his career, after he's in a horrible train crash, and survives it and helps people get out. It really affects his future train travel, and he has great anxiety about train travel. I imagine he was probably never in a huge coach accident that caused him some kind of trauma, as he was later with the train.
It may also be true that he sees it already by this point as a little bit of a cliche.
Yeah,
it is a sort of common stock moment in the melodrama, right? And when it's staged, of course, it can be very spectacular. And maybe he knows that although this whole section of the novel brilliantly sort of invokes cliches only to sort of pop their bubbles or to make fun of them or to use them in a teasing way, maybe it has to do with that too.
Yeah, or we just had it, like
right.
In one of the early issues, we had them where they all flew out of the coach or whatever it was, traveling. And so there's already been that moment, and he doesn't need to play up this one as it happens. I guess, especially with that great payoff with, Pickwick being so angry at Tuppy. So, all right.
I like, by the way, in the illustration that he's lost his hat yet again.
Yes, there it is. Always losing his hat. It must happen to everybody. And all these pictures, all these plates in the coaching book, all these men with their hats on. I'm like, how does your hat stay on? Like, I have a hard time going down the street without like any breeze. I have to grab my hat. I don't know how they all kept their hats on all the time. Must have been so far down in their head, so tight. Or sometimes I do know that something, if it was very windy, they would just wrap it. They would just put a ribbon around their whole hat and right under the chin to keep it on their head. So I haven't resorted to that yet. All righty. The next, so that's it. They're crashed now. They have to walk. Pickwick and Wardle set manfully forward on the walk, tying their shawls around their necks, slouching down their hats to escape as much as possible from the deluge of rain. Like they have a long walk through this rainy mud to get to the next, posting station. Chapter 10, clearing up all doubts, if any existed, of the disinterestedness of Mr. A. Jingle's character. Did I say that right? Disinterestedness. I didn't. I missed a syllable. Clearing up all doubts, if any existed, of the disinterestedness of Mr. A. Jingle's character.
Do you have A in your text?
What's that?
Do you have A in your text?
A, yeah, Mr. A. Jingle's
in this Penguin edition, it's just Mr. Jingle.
Huh. I'm looking at the facsimile here. I do not have it in here either. I wonder if in some later edition that A was added, and that's where I cut and paste my text for this out of off the Project Gutenberg.
Sure.
So which would be a later edition likely of this. Yeah, no, so I don't have A. I just have Jingle, Mr. Jingle's character. No need to call him A. Jingle. And here's where we get, this chapter opens with that paragraph that's again, this is about the inns this time, the coaching inns, and this moment of nostalgia. Lament, it's almost like a little lament for coaching inns. Even though they still exist, they're just not as stately as they used to be, right? There are in London several old inns, once the headquarters of celebrated coaches in the days when coaches performed their journeys in a graver and more solemn manner than they do in these times, but which have now degenerated into little more than the abiding and booking places of country wagons. The reader would look in vain for any of these ancient hostelries among the golden crosses and bull and mouths which rear their stately fronts in the improved streets of London. If he would light upon any of these old places, he must direct his steps to the obscure quarters of the town, and there in some secluded nooks he will find several still standing with a kind of gloomy sturdiness amidst the modern innovations which surround them. There are times when Dickens is almost infuriatingly conservative in his, the past was so lovely, and we're just trudging along in our modern age, and it's awful, but that's the definition of nostalgia.
Though he does go on to say it'd be perfect for a ghost story.
Yeah.
A little bit of a different, it's a slightly different.
Read that Great Rambling. Yeah, right. Well, great rambling, queer old places they are, with galleries and passages and staircases wide enough and antiquated enough to furnish materials for 100 ghost stories. So that's even better. That they get old, they're even better to tell ghost stories in.
Right.
And we will have that in this episode. Well, not a ghost story, but a horror story, a story of terror. Well, they pull up to one of these. Well, they don't pull. The reader and the narrator has brought the reader into this courtyard. And we are here. We're in the White Hart Inn, which was a real inn. It was demolished in 1889. It is an inn that also is featured in Shakespeare's Henry VI, where Jack Cade and the rebels meet there. And in the historical chronicles of that rebellion, that is where they supposedly met. But I love that Henry VI was also performed at one point, because we have this, I think in Henslow's diary, in the White Hart courtyard. that the White Hart was one of those places that did perform plays, in the 17th century. So before theaters were really erected. Somebody even, I had, not just somebody, but Kevin Quinn, one of our co-hosts, shared this, the plaque that is on the site now in historic Southwark, site of the White Hart Inn, immortalized by Shakespeare in Henry VI and Dickens in Pickwick Papers. You can at least go and stand by the plaque where the White Hart was. So thanks for sharing that, Kevin. And he shared that on our Facebook group. And if you're not already on the Facebook group, you should. There's lots of fun stuff happens in between every month. But also, I have a couple pictures of the actual White Hart here. This is the old White Hart Inn, and you can see how perfectly designed it is for theater too. I don't, at some point here, maybe in the foreground, there's a stage and people can be down here in the courtyard, or you can be up here in the galleries that are up in the rooms watching the show. It is, it's interesting how, I'm sure it's because it's the right shape anyway, but then theaters get built in Shakespeare's time and they look just like, in courtyards, don't they? And I think it's because the shape works, but it does wind up resembling that. Here's the entrance over here, and this is where the coach would come into the yard. There's another picture here too. This comes from a book I am reading this month, which I'll share in a minute. This is the White Hart Inn in Southwark in 1858, and this is a little more closer to what we get described in Dickens. You see there's an old coach here with some things in it, and there's sheds here. The way people are working around here. But this is what it would have looked like, and the description in the text is there's a little bit about the man busily employed, but first we'll talk about we'll get back to him. The yard presented none of that bustle and activity, which are the usual characteristics of a large coach inn. 3 or 4 lumbering wagons, a double tier of bedroom galleries, a bar and coffee room, gig. You said jig earlier. Is it jig or gig? I never knew.
Oh, I'm not sure.
I always said gigs. In any case, gigs and chase carts were wheeled up under different little sheds. Boys in smock frocks were lying asleep on heavy packages. So it's that scene that I just showed in those 2 illustrations. That's what's going on. I got this book, Inns and Taverns of Pickwick, which is from 1921, and it's just a description with lots of text from Dickens, from Pickwick throughout, for every single bar, tavern, and coaching inn that they go into for the entire book. And some of them were still existing in 1921, and they're described as they are then, as well as in the past. Some of them have already gone the way. It's a really nice little book that I was able to pick up, which I'll have more to say about later. Again, I always have things that I can say a little now, but I'm going to say a little more later. It's just like a warning. Well, the person that they see here, should we get to him right away? We will. We'll at least get the description of him, and then I'm going to take a little a break. In the White Hart, you want to read his little paragraph, just because it's Sam, and we should read his opening paragraph because he's so important.
Oh, sure.
It was in the yard of one of these inns. The White Hart, that a man.
Yes. Of no less celebrated a one than the White Hart, that a man was busily employed in brushing the dirt off a pair of boots early on in the morning succeeding the events narrated in the last chapter. He was habited in a coarse striped waistcoat with a black calico sleeves and blue glass buttons, drab breeches and leggings, A bright red handkerchief was wound in a very loose and unstudied style round his neck, and an old white hat was carelessly thrown on one side of his head. There were 2 rows of boots before him, one clean and the other dirty, and at every addition he made to the clean row, he paused from his work and contemplated its results with evident satisfaction.
Samuel, well, we'll discover that that's Samuel Weller, but it's okay to say that that's who it is right now. I'm looking for my kid illustration of him. Here it is. Kidd, I think it's Thomas Kidd. No, it's not Thomas Kidd. Somebody else named Kidd, KYD. Later did all these illustrations of these great Dickens characters, great illustrations of Dickens characters. And this was the Samuel Weller as you know, described in that. I mean, this is what is his yellow breeches though in the text, is it? So yeah, these aren't yellow. So we're close. But there he is. Samuel Weller. Then we'll have the, well, let's just look at the illustration too from the because this is the second illustration from Phiz in the book as they come up to greet him. There it is. And you can see the yard is pretty much like it was in those other 2 illustrations. So, you know, Phiz understands this place. He's seen it. He's been in the White Hart in the courtyard. He knows it. But here's Sam Weller looking, you know, very working class, shall we say, especially because the hat is so crumpled and the end of the nose is darker, like it's red. Perhaps that's a sign that he's been drinking, as that was definitely then thought to be a sign of drinking, when your nose would go red. Some people still believe that. It's actually not true. A completely unrelated phenomenon is why your nose will turn red. But yeah, he's got his hand in the boots here, shining them up. They're all lined up here. Pickwick, Wardle, Mr. Perker, the lawyer that Wardle hires. I like the little dog here. Phiz frequently does this. Little dogs, little cats somewhere in the picture around. I'm sure that's true in this place. There's one of the boys lying on a thing in the background here. Not in full detail, just this hazy background.
Though more, not so hazy. There's quite a lot of action.
Well, there's a lot of detail, but it's not brought out in full, like kind of, you know, it's lighter lines to showcase the foreground, right? Sam's first line is a snarky response. Before those gentlemen get there, I just gave you a preview. One of the chambermaids yells to them that number 22 wants his boots. Ask number 22 whether he'll have them now or wait till he gets them. So was the reply. So, you know, right away we're getting this, you know, double talk from Sam right off the bat. And I love the way he 11 pair of boots and one shoe. 11 pair of boots and one shoe is what he's signing. That belongs to number 6 with the wooden leg. So he only has one shoe. And then we get the first Wellerism in the book. And my plan is to every Wellerism we're definitely going to read out loud. But I don't know. There might be so many Wellerisms later as he's really in the book that we might just, I don't know. So I have a book of Wellerism. Well, I'll get to that in a second. But his first one is, why don't you do the first one? Who's number 22? He says that's to pull all the others out, and then
No, regular rotation, as Jack Ketch said. Then he tied the men up. Sorry to keep you a-waiting, sir, but I'll attend to you directly.
And to understand that Wellerism, Jack Ketch is the executioner. He's the hangman. There was a hangman, I think, named Jack Ketch, right, in the late 17th or early 18th century, and then it became a term for the hangman, Jack Ketch. So when, and this is what a Wellerism is. It's when it's a saying, an aphorism, a proverb, a thing that means something, but then within it, you get a particular character, and when they say it, it means something else. So, you know, regular rotation, sorry to keep you waiting, I'll attend to you directly, means something if someone says it as they're waiting to be waited on and for anything. But when the hangman says it, that means something else. So, and that is what we will continually get from Samuel Weller, are these Wellerisms. I will make an attempt to read them all out as Pickwick Monthly progresses. I hope we can always do them. And there is a book, there's an old book you can get, which I only have a digital copy of, but I think I'm going to see if I can find a physical copy of it. And it is Wellerisms from Pickwick and Master Humphrey's Clock. I mean, because Weller and his father, Tony Weller, who will appear in Pickwick later, actually come in some of these kind of introductory chapters from this periodical that Dickens is doing, in little scenes. He doesn't tell another story about them. They're just introducing stories and almost. And there's a whole collection of them published in 1850, 60, 70, 80, 86. I hate when Roman numerals I have to add. And published 86. But I love this right here. It says, some write well, but he writes Weller. Epigram on Dickens. So that's true. Some authors do write well, but Dickens writes Weller. And look at the contents here. This is why I wonder, like, can I use all of them? Because there's so many in here. They go on and on throughout the novel. I think some of these, well, that's all the ones from Pickwick. I think some of them are just funny lines. They're not technically Wellerisms as we've defined them. So hopefully we'll be able to share all the Wellerisms as we go on with this story. Well, that's where I'm going to take a little mid-break first, and then we'll get into what happens when the gentlemen, when Pickwick and Wardle and Mr. Perker walk up to Sam. But let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Dickens lovers worldwide. And if you would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. You could also become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission. It gives you discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website, and a Rosenbach membership also makes a great gift. We have lots of great virtual and in-person programs and courses coming up over the summer. You can go on our website to find out what they're all about. And you can also join us on the Facebook group page, Pickwick Monthly, for lots more info, news, links, conversation, and fun. And I thought, since so many of you are sending me emails every month, which I absolutely love, I thought that I would start regularly featuring them at our mid-break for a little segment called The Corresponding Members of Pickwick Monthly. So that was, I came up with that today. Maybe I'll come up with a better. I thought that was, related to the title. I wanted something, right? So the Corresponding Members of Pickwick Monthly. Here they are this month. Henrietta J. has been sending me lots of notes after the shows, and I love them. She sends like a whole thing of notes that she took during the show about things that she knows, because she's a brilliant Dickensian herself and knows lots of things. And this is one of the things that she wrote to me last month. Charles Dickens is writing not for the university schooled crowd, no Greek or Latin in his stories. Well, it's funny, we do get a little Latin from Perker later, but it's only humorously intended, right? But Dickens is writing for the lovers of pubs, popular theater, simple songs, and English basic Shakespeare and basic Shakespeare and 1611 Bible. The language he writes challenges modern readers, but in the 1830s, ordinary people understood the vocabulary and complex sentences he was writing. He incorporates commonplace into stories, accessible to new readers, household furniture, clothing, street shops, theater jokes, health entertainments. I mean, that's the audience Dickens is going for, is this working class, middle class audience that he knows will be attuned to his jokes. Adam P. wrote to me to ask about the connection of Poe with a Madman's manuscript. We will absolutely talk about later in today's show. I can't wait to talk about that. George D. wrote to me. At first, this great line, Pickwick may be an inch deep, but it is a mile wide. And that might be a good way to describe this novel. Like it might not have the greatest complexity of themes, ideas to it, but it is so capacious that you wind up talking about all of those things anyway, right? Like it all winds up being there in a whole different way. And then George also wrote, somebody wrote a whole book about the coaching inns described in Pickwick. Well, it was George's nudge that made me remember I had a PDF copy of Inns and Taverns of Pickwick. And then I was like, oh my God, I should get that real one. So I ordered this copy of it. And I love it because it's got an inscription in it too that is, it's Eleanor, it could be Lagerman, I'm not sure, from Father, Christmas 1921. So I like that. I think it's Eleanor got this gift from her dad for Christmas, the Inns and Taverns of Pickwick. There we go. I'm happy I ordered that. Thanks for reminding me of it, George. Max M wrote to tell me about a Pickwickian reference. In another book, he says, this past Sunday, our group reading the Lord Peter Wimsey stories met to discuss the short story collection entitled Hangman's Holiday. Lord Peter Wimsey is, remind me, author, Dorothy Sayers. In one of those stories in this collection, and they're murder mystery stories, some members were confused by this passage. Lord Peter's friends greeted his appearance in London with mild surprise. And what have you been doing with yourself? Demanded the Honorable Freddie Arbuthnot. Eloping with another man's wife, replied his lordship, but only, he hastened to add, in a purely Pickwickian sense. Nothing in it for yours truly. Oh, well, let's toddle around to the Holborn Empire and see what George Roby can do for us. And then Max wrote, thanks to your project and my reading along, I was able to clarify both what Lord Peter meant by that phrase. So, that in the Pickwickian sense, that's the only way he was eloping with another man's wife. So, I love to hear from all of you. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you come across a Pickwickian reference or a Dickensian reference somewhere and you want to share it with me, please do. Or if you just have a question about the serial part we're reading that month or a comment on the one we've just done, don't hesitate to drop me a note at epettit, EPETTIT at rosenbach.org. And you will join the growing number of the corresponding members of Pickwick Monthly. Back to the story. So, Wellerisms. There's a book of Wellerisms that Sam has. There's also a dictionary of Wellerisms that are not actually anything from Dickens. This is a whole book of taking that kind of phrase, that the way that's constructed, that humorous saying, this kind of this kind of aphorism or proverb, and then introducing by naming a particular character how it changes its meaning. And here's a whole giant book of over 1,000, over 1,516 different Wellerisms from all kinds of authors, and they're divided up by subjects, last, late, laugh, raise, rear, reckoning, pledge, poetry, point, penny. So a penny for your thoughts, as the cheap newspaper reader said to the editor of a daily. They're not that funny always. Dickens as Wellers are really funny. Ours is a common lot, as the toads said when they got into the clover field. It doesn't seem that one. I don't know. That didn't catch me. I didn't ahead of time grab any to share with people. I pause for a reply, as the cat said to the owl. Pause is P-A-W-S. Sometimes it just could be a pun like that. But there's a whole dictionary of Wellerisms that I don't bother to use. I just go to my Wellerisms right from Sam Weller. That's all I ever need. So, all righty. Where are we at now? There's also, where are we? Boys, is regular location, Jack Ketch. Sam finds that there are, the boots and the shoes that this chambermaid wants ready done are actually from a couple in a private sitting room. And as soon as Sam hears that, he takes the chalk from his pocket and he makes a memorandum of their destination of the souls. That's how he remembers all the shoes. He puts their room number on the bottom in chalk. But that they're in a private sitting room, that could mean an extra shilling, a day, if, let alone if they want him to run any errands. So he's right on those. And then we get an interesting joke that connects to Dickens's life, right? Did you catch this? The Warren?
Yes.
Just read that little Mr. Samuel brushed away.
He brushed away with such hearty goodwill that in a few minutes the boots and shoes with a polish which would have struck envy to the soul of the amiable Mr. Warren, for they used Day and Martin at the White Hart, had arrived at the door of number 5.
Who is Mr. Warren, Jake?
Well, so this is a joke about the blacking factory at which the young Charles Dickens was painfully employed.
When his father went to debtor's prison, they put him to work. They put Charles to work in the blacking factory.
Day Martin is a competitor who gets a little boost here at the expense of an old bad boss.
Yeah, so and blacking factory, it's shoe polish, and that's what they do. Little bottles of it almost looks like soot, right? Don't you? And then you add something to it. It's not. I don't think it's a liquid. But I could be wrong. But in any case, it's shoe polish. And Dickens says the child is pasting labels. He's mortified, horrified by this experience in his life, that he was put in this position. Especially as the story goes, he looked like a little gentleman, right? So he didn't look like the rest of the dirty little kids that they were, employing. So they put him in the window to do his work, so people would see this, this nice, clean little boy working there. It gives kind of a good image. He is on display, doing this, menial labor. And Dickens says, hi, he's horrified by this. He keeps it a secret. It winds up in David Copperfield, right? He gives David that experience, and then admits the story to Forster, his friend John Forster. Dickens does, and writes it up, and Forster includes it in his bio of Dickens after Dickens dies, but Dickens never revealed it in his life to many people at all. Forster knew, and very few people, if any, knew about this incident in his life. And here he's like, and they don't even use Warrens at the White Hart Inn; they use Day and Martin. So
there,
yeah, that's what you get. Of course, if I'm Warren, I'd be like, I got a mention. I'm good. No, all publicity is good publicity. So, The Sam now goes to deliver the shoes. Jingle and Rachel, he asks them what their Jingle asks if he knows where Doctor's Commons is. Sam does. It's in Paul's churchyard, low archway on the carriage side, booksellers at one quarter, hotel on the other, two porters in the middle as toots for licenses. So, or touts for licenses. And then Sam goes into a whole story. Touts for licenses, said the gentleman, and the gentleman is Jingle. And then he tells the whole story about how his father, who we will meet, Tony Weller, later in the book, has been, he was a coachman and a widower and fat enough for anything, uncommon fat to be sure. His missus dies and leaves him 400 pounds. And then he goes down to Doctor's Commons. This is a legal place here. The civil ecclesiastical law courts, and you get licenses and for different things there. And the lawyers, and just one of these, the lawyers comes up, or one of these men comes up and says, "Oh, do you need a license?" "Well, license for what?" And he gets him in. He's licensed to get married. I'm not planning to get married." "Well, you should." And he's like, "Well, okay, I'll just get one in case I need it." And he even puts a woman's name on it, and then winds up marrying her. What the heck? He got the license, right? The point of the story for Sam is he never got any of the 400 pounds because he got remarried, and that money never came to the son. So, but it's a shaggy, it's like a weird, it's not quite a Shaggy Dog story. It's not, it's just another one of these humorous stories that Sam gets to tell, throughout. It's a lot of fun, but the Doctor's Commons things is interesting, right? Because Dickens was a reporter there. And it's civil and ecclesiastical courts, very old fashioned. They're gradually phased out over the 19th century, and people know this place as like obsolete. Like this shouldn't exist anymore. And one of the sketches by Bose, is on Doctor's Commons. I think it might even be called Doctor's Commons. And also in David Copperfield, we get a little bit of Doctor's Commons.
Well, and we also here have it combined within Sam's story, this sort of proto-Dickensian theme of this sort of needless, scandalous bureaucracy that wraps you up into doing far more than you could ever possibly want to do. Of course, this marriage is a completely ludicrous kind of version of that joke.
Yeah.
But it does get folded in here already to this sense of, like sitting in line at the DMV and you get upsold on the marriage.
And it's in the sketches, it's in Pickwick. Dickens loves to poke fun at the legal system of his time, which was as bad as it ever was going to be. Like I think the British legal system maybe peaked at ineptitude in the and bureaucratic craziness. I mean, our British friends can tell us if that's true in the 19th century. I'm sure it's still a mess now, as legal systems in large countries tend to be. But Dickens sure has a lot of fun with it throughout his novel, and more than just fun. And it's also serious issues, and especially thinking what Bleak House and Jarndyce versus Jarndyce, and how it rips families apart and destroys them over time.
The tragic version. And in Little Dorrit too, right? The circumlocution office and the
oh yeah, I do know about that, even though I haven't read it. I don't want to hear any more about it.
My lips are sealed.
It's so hard reading things about Dickens, and as soon as they start talking about Little Dorrit, I have to like skim through the paragraphs because I don't want to find anything out. So it's been many years since I've watched those the movies and the movies on them. I did not watch the BBC miniseries that they did several years ago on purpose, but many years ago I watched those two movies that Christine Ezard, I think, made. I can't remember her last name, where she filmed two Little Dorrit films. They're both 2 hours long, but it's the same story, but she just tells them from a different character's perspective. So you wind up with two seemingly separate movies that go over the same events. And they're beautiful. Derek Jacobi's in them. They're really wonderful movies. But as I haven't seen them in 25 years or more, I can't remember anything from it anyway. So
And that's how you want it.
Mhm. Not until I read the issues themselves. Okay, well, here we are with Jingle. Sam tells him the story and where to go get the license. We get this funny interplay between Jingle and Rachel. License, what time for what? License, dearest of angels. Give notice at the church. Call you mine tomorrow. And he squeezes her hand. The license. And he gets a little song here. How you run on, nothing to the hours, days, weeks, months, years when we're united. Run on, they'll fly on, bolt, missile, steam engine, 1,000 horsepower, nothing to it. He's really laying it on thick with her. She completely believes him. I want to get to her treatment. I want to get in a bit. I'm going to ask you about this. Her treatment by Dickens in this world, what this means, her how this character is treated as well. There's a lot of humor in it and it's fun, but there's a serious side that Dickens ignores that I think is serious. Anyway, well, now. And I already shared this picture because I wanted to, because that was all about Sam Weller in the courtyard. I wanted to show you this picture. Now they're gone. Now is when Pickwick and Wardle's lawyer entered the courtyard. Sam's busy at the other shoes that he's shining. 2 plump gentlemen and 1 thin one entered the yard. The lawyer, who we find out his name, Mr. Perker, is a little high-dried man. I'm not sure what high-dried means. A little high-dried man. I'm not sure what that means. I'm drawing a total blank. I didn't think of it when I hit it. What does that mean? Dried high? I'm like maybe where you're hanging to be. I have no idea. With a dark, squeezed up face and small, restless black eyes that kept winking and twinkling on each side of his little inquisitive nose, as if they were playing a perpetual game of peep-bo with that feature. So, Dickens's, initial descriptions of characters are always human, even when I don't know what high-dried is. I'm gonna have to look up that phrase. And here it's a lawyer, right? And then how he's dressed, and his black, all in black, and his boots and his neckcloth and his gold watch chain and all this stuff. And this is a little, lawyer caricature is what we're getting here. And he's the one that goes up to Sam and asks, pretty busy, eh? Is his intro. And then Sam's got to have like humorous lines at him. You're a wag, ain't you? My oldest brother was troubled with that complaint, said Sam. It may be catching. I used to sleep with him. He's just got something funny to say to everything he's going to say. He's not going to give him a real, answer. And he's also, then he takes a pinch of snuff, right? Yeah. And the lawyer takes a pinch of snuff from an oblong silver box. Now, I'm sure most people watching this know what snuff is. But I imagine that there's probably, another generation or even that doesn't understand what snuff is anymore. I don't even know if it exists anymore. Snuff, for those who don't know, is pulverized tobacco. It's tobacco just in like a powder form that people in the 18th and then into the 19th, but then it starts to go away, would literally just snort. They would just take a pinch of it and they would stick it in their nose and they would sniff it up. And so it's like mainlining nicotine. It's getting nicotine right up into your nasal passages. I think it probably works faster than smoking, right? To get the than even a cigarette. Although I'm not sure. I've always heard that the cigarette is the most efficient nicotine delivery system. But people loved snuff back then. and it was huge, and lots of people did snuff, and it was prevalent. As many people snuffed as probably more maybe than smoked pipes back then. But you would be hard pressed to ever find a fictional account of someone taking snuff in which the author isn't making them look ridiculous. Like, I'm trying to think of a snuff taker in 18th or 19th century novels that's not just ridiculous and that doesn't exist, right? Do you know of any?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it is a comic. It's funny because it seems comic to us because it's unfamiliar, but
Yeah.
it must have just been comic even when it was familiar. It's just too funny a thing to do.
And I guess the first people who saw people lighting tobacco in whatever form, pipes, cigars, and then later cigarettes, must have thought, like, that's bizarre. Snuff is just weird. and they're constantly sneezing, and it's, and it's like, you can't, I can't imagine how unpleasant taking snuff must have been like that. Somebody joked
for the people around.
Yeah, somebody joked about, snuff was the inspiration for Coke, just different leaves, in a way. But even Coke, like, people would do drug and that, like, you just do it and then you're high for a while. Like, snuff it was like a constant thing. You would just do it all the time. I mean, I guess you could do that with Coke too, but you'd be, you couldn't do it for that long. I do remember reading Henry Fielding's novels, and he has this kind of sharp division. And I always I've really noticed it in Tom Jones, and then I noticed it in other Fielding works too. And I always wanted to write this. I never wrote this essay on snuff and pipe smoking in Fielding. All snuff takers are ridiculous people who do stupid things, and all pipe smokers are wise. And he constantly seems to be making this distinction. Of course, I noticed it with, as a pipe smoker myself, but he makes that distinction in his characters, and probably unconsciously, but then he winds up using it over and over. And I think that goes on in Dickens too. So,
well, and this whole section is so influenced by Fielding.
Yeah.
Even the sort of coaching plot has a complete, Joseph Andrews is the sort of archetype of that for the British. So.
And part of his, and again, thanks for reminding me, because that's part of his nostalgia, right? Dickens' nostalgia for coaching days isn't just the real life thing, which he only didn't really experience himself. It's all these novels that feature it, right? Fielding and Smollett and
roast beef.
Yeah. So that have all these coaching scenes in them. And for everybody, remember, Dickens loves Fielding so much, he has a son named Henry Fielding Dickens. So, all righty. Well, this lawyer, Perker, takes a pinch of snuff. And then Mr. Pickwick kind of tries to interfere. He's like, hey, to Sam, I'm going to offer you some money. And then the lawyer's like, no, you can't. I'm in charge of the business negotiations. He has to stop him. No interfering with a lawyer when he was trying to get information. He drops a couple Latin terms, amicus curiae, which is like a friend of the court, ad capandum, which I think might mean bribe. I think, it does. That's where I got my notes. And then he takes an argumentative pinch of snuff. But he mentions, and then he starts even throwing up a case here. If any authority can be necessary on such a point, my dear sir, let me refer you to the well-known case in Barnwell. And then Sam interrupts, never mind George Barnwell. And this is a moment that, Henrietta in that letter to me mentioned the kind of Dickens audience. And this is a moment that kind of really keys into that, where the lawyer, in a sense, thinks his audience are people who know the law and law cases that he will do. But Dickens and his characters are hear a name Barnwell, and they go right to George Barnwell, a well-known murderer. from like way back, like over 100 years ago.
In a way, it's kind of from way back, but quite recently repopularized on stage. And
Dickens loved that play. It's a play, The London Merchant by George Lillo, that had this resurgence again in the 19th century. Or was there another play like even on top of that? I don't even know.
Yeah, I think of the, well, I'd have to, yeah, I believe there's a sort of, there are a lot of re-melodramatizations in the 30s of these sort of classic criminal stories. But what strikes me here too is that it's the same structure of joke as the Wellerism, right? It's except he doesn't know he's making it.
That's right. Yeah. He's, like as if he was saying George Barnwell, but he's not saying George, like add that name that changes the meaning of something. And that's what Sam's doing. He's changing the meaning of what he's talking about by adding the name George Barnwell.
And that's why Sam is the one to jump in right there. Never mind George Barnwell. It's he sees the Wellerism to be made, although he doesn't probably realize it's quite what's happening, and he just has to break into the speech.
Yep. And he gives a detail of it. He says, that young woman deserves scragging a precious sight more than he did. And the story is that, it's a spoiler, but you can go read the story of George Barnwell. It was well known to Dickens, everybody. Barnwell is involved with a prostitute, Sarah Millwood, and she convinces him to steal money from his employer, and then he does. And then she convinces him to start stealing money from his uncle, but he also winds up murdering his uncle because I think he gets caught. I can't remember exact details. But by the end of the play and the story, and usually the ballads that are about him, he's penitent in the end. But Sarah Millwood is like not penitent by the end. It's like, it's not my fault. And Sam's catching that, Sam's kind of saying that thing about it, and Dickens probably thinks the same. So and then he's like, oh, if you want to give me money, fine. And then we get a Wellerism, right? Go ahead, the last line there.
The next question is, what the devil do you want with me? As the man said when he seed the ghost.
A Wellerism. That's a good one too. What the devil do you want with me? As the man said when he see the ghost. I wish I could remember these. I have this horrible memory. Like, wouldn't it be great if you could remember, if you have such a good memory that you could throw Wellerisms off when appropriate? Somebody does. I'm sure actors do, because they got that ability to remember like that, but I don't. Well, they want to know who you've got in this house at present, and Sam gives a list. There's a wooden leg in number 6. There's a pair of Hessians in 13. There's 2 pair of halves in the commercial, and these here painted tops in the snuggery inside the bar, and 5 more tops in the coffee room. He knows everybody by their shoes. And a pair of Wellingtons, a good deal worn, and a pair of ladies' shoes in number 5. Let me stop there too, because the WV thing for everyone. I think in modern days, we kind of generally associate that with almost a kind of Germanism that you're trying to get that effect in a dialect or another language. For Dickens' day, it was a kind of Cockney way. He's trying to mimic the speech of urban, working class that would replace their W's with V's. I don't know how much that still goes on. I don't know if you do, but it's very strong.
It's hard to quite hear it in a certain way. I think I associate it so much with this kind of transcription.
Yeah.
That it's like at this historical distance, it's like a visual gag as much as anything else.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that wasn't true for contemporary readers. I'm sure this was a pretty...
And it's a strong caricature anyway. Like, even for people, I'm sure it's just a strong caricature. It's not actually the way people, not every Philadelphian sounds exactly like Rocky, right? It's like there are differences. there are some similarities, but it's not really that extreme all the time.
One thing I think we can speculate with confidence is that nobody ever actually sounded quite like Sam Weller.
Yeah, I mean, or is Dickens really imitating like certain comic performers at the time? Some people have had these, you know, I've written about these. There were comic performers who were doing acts that may have seemed in description to be a lot like Weller. And Dickens was known to love the theater and known to, you know, be attached to, you know, certain performers. Grimaldi was one, and pull pieces of those people into his stories. And there may have been a character on stage, and I think people have written about that there was, but to tie him exact, because Dickens never said that he kind of mimicked Sam Weller after someone, but that may be.
Of course, Sam Weller becomes that character, right?
Yeah.
Vastly dramatized, you know, burlesqued, popularized. Yeah. What if there's somebody being imitated here, it gets flipped immediately.
He becomes that popular in a sense. I mean, for Dickens's audience at the time, and from here going forward, it's the Sam Weller papers. That's really what his audience, his original reading audience, saw this book as. There are other characters in it, but Sam Weller becomes the central character for Dickens's first audience in the 19th century. You know, he's the one that's featured most in all the stage adaptations. And the Fat Boy is really popular too, but it only as a weird character that everybody knows. Weller's almost driving the, you know, the kind of popularity market for the marketing for Pickwick after he appears here. We've you and some of the other co-hosts have talked about the Don Quixote stuff in this novel a couple times already, and yeah,
it's another moment where that comes to the fore. You know, Sam for now is still a sort of a stranger to Pickwick, but this sort of wordplay malapropism phenomenon that he's already getting associated with already begins to associate him with Sancho Panza, the famous squire of Don Quixote, and that sort of pairing with Mr. Pickwick, of course, becomes another sort of structuring principle here.
Yeah. Well, he tells them what room they're in. They all break in. Wardle, and at the same time, Jingle's already returned, and he's showing the license to the spinster, and she gives up a loud shriek, throws herself into a chair, covers her face. Jingle quick crumples up the license, puts it in his coat pocket. Wardle lays right in, defamation of character, action for damages. That's the little man. You know, Wardle comes in, you're a nice rascal, and Perker's like, whoa, don't call him names. Defamation of character, action for damages. You got to be careful what you say here. And then Wardle says, you know, you're a scoundrel. This is my lawyer. And then he says, Rachel, at a time of life when you ought to know better, what do you mean by running away with a vagabond, disgracing your family and making yourself miserable? Now, it's a weird thing in this, because I think all kind of consideration gets taken away from Rachel, right? Who is this older woman who is finally within like days, two men are wooing her. And this is like, oh my gosh, and she just goes with the wrong one. And she's got to suffer for it. None of the men do. But at least Wardle recognizes this, like making yourself miserable. Yeah, it's like disgracing your family. This is all bad. But that making yourself miserable is a nice touch in the sense that at least it shows that he's there to get her out of this situation. That he recognizes what's that?
Or thinks he is.
Yeah. Jingle tries to stop him. Lady's free to act as she pleases. More than 1 in 20. More than 1 in 20? More than 1 in 40. He says, I ain't, said the spinster aunt. You are. You're 50 or if you're an hour. and then she shrieks again and faints. You know, it's the simultaneous. It is funny. I find it very funny, but it's also mean. It's funny in that mean-spirited way, and that Wardle is not at all considering her feelings, treating her as a person who should be able to make her own decisions.
Well, and this is a good example of what we were saying earlier about the sort of invocation and then sort of deflation of sort of stereotypical or cliched plot devices, right? This Rachel's plot is a very standard plot, but it is a standard plot for a young, naive teenager who is seduced and runs away and brings disgrace to the family by doing so. I think part of the humor here is that sort of refiguring of this sort of familiar literary structure. And there's a little bit of a joke here on Mr. Wardle, who, you know, bringing disgrace onto the family. Well, is it bringing disgrace onto the family? I mean, she's not really his ward. This is not the situation that it mirrors or mimics. And of course, that's what is being played on too when she's so, it's not just that she's sort of, how dare you mention a lady's age, but also the way that it calls attention to the sort of imbalance between this plot device and who it's happening to. And I think that's part of the joke here. And, you know, of course, there is something completely sort of nasty about the idea that it's, you know, funny just because it's happening to an old woman who is not, in fact, an old woman at all, but is not a 17-year-old girl or whatever the sort of narrative structure expects her to be.
Well, she faints away. And,
she faints. She falls back into the character by fainting.
Yes. Is it a real faint? Her determination, her indignation getting the better of her determination to faint. A glass of water, said the passionate water, bring a bucket. But she, the men go off then, and, you know, well, they're going to take her out of there. And Jingle says, you know, Boots, he's talking to Sam, get me an officer. And then Perker's like, okay. Let's, you know, because he could. They can't take her away. If she wants to stay, she gets to stay. But they understand that Jingle has no real interest in her. And Perker says, you know, he says to Wardle, we're going to have to pay something for this. We're going to suffer some pecuniary loss. And Wardle says, I'll suffer any rather than submit to this disgrace. That's the first thing. His pride, his family pride, and let her, fool as she is, be made miserable for life. So I think there's that little thing in there. Again, it's the second moment here where he's acknowledged that she's going to be miserable. She doesn't understand that he doesn't love her, and I've got to help her. So it's still very patronizing, but it is.
It's on the one hand, it's of course true that one wouldn't want anybody to be married to Jingle. On the other hand, he doesn't have a lot of credibility because of how he responded to the Tupman gossip either.
Yeah.
Right. He was just as horrified at that prospect.
Well, like the mother, like, how dare you? Like, really? Right. Like, shouldn't you be happy? Finally. So if they were, this wouldn't have happened. She'd just be with Tupman. They would have been fine. All righty. Jingle realized, well, Jingle knows what he's about. He's like, all right, I'll get some money now instead of having to wait till later for some kind of inheritance. And you never know, an inheritance could change, right? So, and wills can be changed, and he may wind up with nothing later down the road. So they have a negotiation, and he keeps upping the number. Every number that Perker says, Jingle ups. And he gets 120 pounds out of this to go away.
Disinterested indeed.
Yeah. Let me get to my notes here. Yeah. So he's going to get 120 pounds. And then I like the detail here that, like, even the check is written to be cashed the next day. So, like, that's a detail that doesn't need to be here, but it's like, let's make sure we get to take her away and get her home before you can cash the check. So nothing else could go wrong. Off directly, said the unabashed Jingle. Bye-bye, Pickwick. And then Mr. Pickwick's getting like really angry at this, but I'm gonna stay cool. He restrained himself. He did not pulverize him. And then he says it again, and he gives Pickwick the license. Get the name altered. Take home the lady. Do for Tuppy. Mr. Pickwick was a philosopher, but philosophers are only men in armor after all. The shaft had reached him, penetrated through his philosophical harness to his very heart. In the frenzy of his rage, he hurled the inkstand madly forward and followed it up himself. So Tuppy again has put him over the edge, and he throws an inkstand, the only weapon he had at hand. It's a good thing he didn't have a knife or a sword. And it misses him and hits the wall, and Sam's like, whoa, settle down. And Sam stops him from going out. Shall we tell the lamentations that ensued when Miss Wardle found herself deserted by the faithless Jingle? Shall we extract Mr. Pickwick's masterly description of that heart-rending scene? Well, we don't. And then that's, and the chapter will end that all these histrionics have ended.
This is, by the way, that great comment about an inch deep and a mile wide. This is one of the ways Dickens does that, right? His narrator tells us, and of course there's much deep feeling felt, which we will respectfully overlook. We'll pass it right over. But believe you me, it's there.
All righty. Last chapter for this part is chapter 11, involving another journey and an antiquarian discovery, recording Mr. Pickwick's determination to be present at an election and containing a manuscript of the old clergyman. So, they return to Dingley Dell, to Manor Farm at Dingley Dell, and Tupman is gone. How is Tupman? Mr. Pickwick says. And right away, they're like, he is gone. Gone? Gone? Gone. Where? And he's not dead. He is just left. But he's left a note that life, my dear Pickwick, has become insupportable to me. The spirit which burns within us is a porter's knot on which to rest the heavy load of worldly cares and troubles. And when that spirit fails us, the burden is too heavy to be borne. We sink beneath it. You may tell Rachel, that name. And he signs it off. And before that, it's any letter addressed to me at the Leather Bottle, Cobham, Kent. We'll find him. So we must leave directly to save, Tupman from his being rejected by Rachel, and losing 10 pounds. They right before they leave, they are told, the clergyman stops him and he says, wait, I have this manuscript. This is like so bizarre. wait, before you leave, I have a manuscript that you need to read. And he gives the whole story of like, it was, I got it from a medical man engaged in a lunatic asylum. I could have destroyed it, but I thought I would keep it. And it seems to be genuine. It's a production of a maniac or founded upon the ravings of some unhappy being. Like, big setup here. Like, and then we don't get it.
Big setup for no. I mean, it's a very, the idea that it's important that Pickwick read this.
Yes. And then he just, okay, sticks in his pocket. He'll read it later. Mr. Pickwick kissed the young ladies, we were going to say, as if they were his own daughters, only as he might possibly have infused a little more warmth into the salutation. It's a little gross, but hey, that's what happened. He's kissing all the girls goodbye. Snodgrass as seems to be have something going on with Emily, and he at last emerged from a dark passage, followed soon after by Emily. poor Tupman could have had the same thing. He could have been off with Aunt Rachel, but not yet. And then they go to so they say their goodbyes to the Wardle family and leave, take the coach to Rochester, and then walk to Cobham, and to the after a half hour's walk, which is this beautiful place, and where they're going, brought them to a village. Mr. Pickwick says, really, for a misanthrope's choice, this is one of the prettiest and most desirable places of residence I ever met with. So it's like Tubman's really just taking a little vacation. And they go to the Leather Bottle, a clean and commodious village alehouse. And it actually exists. And even and you can go there today. It's apparently still there today. And they have a big, like, Dickens room. Like, Dickens used to go to this place and meet friends there, and enjoy himself. And they've always recognized it. And the place still exists. I'm sure it's gone through a succession of many different owners. But it was in my Inns and Taverns book, talking about how it's there. And they have a special room that you can go and with all this Dickens, memorabilia around it. And I looked it up online, and it's still there. You can go and maybe sleep in the same room that Dickens probably slept in when he was there. So he knew it very well. And they find Tupman there in this, very, old, English kind of tavern, low roofed room, high back leather cushion chairs, old portraits and prints on the walls. And on a table well covered with a roast fowl, bacon, ale, and etceteras was Mr. Tupman, looking as unlike a man who had taken his leave of the world as possible. Well, Pickwick, I'm going to get through this so we can get to the stuff towards the end of this chapter. Pickwick takes a walk with him. He brings him out for a walk, and he convinces Tupman that he must go on, and he says, "You're right, I should." And so Tupman agrees to rejoin them in their travels. But on the way back, Mr. Pickwick's eye fell upon a small broken stone partially buried in the ground in front of a cottage door. He paused. This is strange. And he falls on his knees and he wipes off this dust, and there is an inscription here. He says, I can discern a cross and a 13 and then a T. And he says, this is a very old inscription existing perhaps long before the ancient almshouses in this place. And he calls out the cottager of the house and knocks on the door, and he says, I'll give you 10 shillings for it at once if you would take it up for me. And the guy's like, sure. And they gets a spade and he gets it up and he gives it to him, and he sells him the stone like in front of the front door, right? That's all it is. But it's got an inscription, and Pickwick carefully washes it. And let me share you I'll share the serial page with the inscription. Here it is.
And this joke, we should say, is more or less borrowed from Walter Scott.
Yeah, from the Antiquary, which I read recently. But here it is. This is what's on it. It's this mark. And it's interesting because he says at first he thought he saw 13, which must have been this B here, like a 1-3.
Yes.
And then but this is what's on there. And this is a momentous discovery, like it's some ancient carvings from, Dark Age Britain that he has found. And antiquarianism is it's been going on from the 17th century on, but the 19th century kind of takes on this. It's a hobby pursued by many men of leisure, maybe. and it Mr. Pickwick, is overjoyed with finding this memorial of olden time and strange and curious inscription of unquestionable antiquity. And then he says that we're gonna go back. We have to go back home. We have to go back home to London. We have to reveal this. We have to do this. And then he says, but also in a few days, an election is to take place for the borough of Eatanswill. And if you're not getting the pun there, eat and swill, that's what's there. It's Eatanswill, at which Mr. Perker, a gentleman whom I lately met, is the agent of one of the candidates. So that'll happen next chapter after. Mr. Pickwick, so they're ready to travel home. We'll get back to the stone at the end of the chapter. Now he's going to go to bed. It's been a long day. And he can't sleep. Whether it was the unwanted exertion he had undergone, like having someone dig up a stone for you, having a nice lunch at the leather bottle, or the heat, or the brandy and water, it might have been that, or the strange bed, whatever it was, he couldn't sleep. And then he starts getting creeped out. It's late at night. He's hearing the bell tolling, anything he thought was better than lying there fancying all kinds of horrors. He looked out the window. It was very dark. He walked about the room. It was lonely. I know. I'll read this manuscript. Creeped out, can't sleep. I'll read this manuscript. Well, that's the opposite effect, right? Because the manuscript that he's going to read is a madman's manuscript. I'll briefly sell the story, and then I want to hit a couple things in it. The narrator, I'll hit some things in it. It opens with, yes, a madman's. How that word would have struck to my heart many years ago. How it would have roused the terror that used to come upon me sometimes, sending the blood hissing and tingling through my veins till the cold dew of fear stood in large drops upon my skin and my knees knocked together with fright. I like it now, though. It's a fine name. And then by the end of that paragraph, he's in a madhouse, and he is. So we're getting the confession of a madman. And he tells us, he's like, I remember days when I was afraid of being mad. That he was always afraid of madness. He was told that both his father and his grandfather went mad. We know he's in a madhouse then. He says the nights here are long, sometimes very long. But he's also, I was too cunning for them, madman as they thought me. And if you're hearing the telltale narrator in there, it's or the Black Cat narrator. I think it's more the Black Cat narrator I hear from Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, we're hearing echoes of that, like, oh, I'll show them I'm not mad. And but this character, he was always afraid of being mad, but hid it from everyone. And then he becomes wealthy. And then he marries a poor girl, which benefits her family, but then discovers she was in love with someone else. And then we get a couple haunting moments here in a second, but the rest of the story is he pities her fate, and so he decides to kill her. And then he attempts, and then she wakes up and sees him and knows what's going on. And it seems that the situation she's in, that she's been forced into this marriage, and also now that she's terrified that he's going to kill her, she goes insane and dies the next day. Then he in a sense reveals his insanity while accusing her brother of greed in sacrificing his sister for wealth, and then goes crazy and lets it all out. And then they chase him and they put him in a madhouse. And there's a postscript that I'll get to at the end. But these haunted, there's two little parts here. This paragraph, I don't remember forms or faces now, but I know the girl was beautiful. I know she was, for in the bright moonlight nights when I start up from my sleep and all is quiet about me, I see standing still and motionless in one corner of this cell a slight, and wasted figure with long black hair, which streaming down her back stirs with no earthly wind, and eyes that fix their gaze on me and never wink or close. Hush, the blood chills at my heart as I write it down. That form is hers. The face is very pale and the eyes are glassy bright, but I know them well. It never frowns and mouths as others do that fill this place sometimes, but it is much more dreadful to me even than the spirits that tempted me many years ago. It comes fresh from the grave and is so very death-like. I mean, this creepy, that's a great little passage. And he's in the madhouse and she's there all the time, you know, haunting him. And he, and then a little after that, he says like, oh, and I found out that she was in love with somebody else and was forced to marry me. And then he says, oh, well, in that case, I resolved to kill her. Like, I'm helping her out of her situation. Like, he's completely mad. And that is the what we get through the story. Well, by the end, when they finally get him and they lock him up, there's a kind of denouement to the story. Not a denouement, a postscript to the story is what I meant to say. At the end, he wakes up, he says, she's still there, right? For from the first shades of dusk till the earliest light of morning, it still stands motionless in the same place, listening to the music of my iron chain and watching my gambols on my straw bed. Like, she's constantly haunting him there in his cell. But the end has a postscript. The unhappy man whose ravings are recorded here above was a melancholy instance of the baneful results of energies misdirected in early life and excesses prolonged until their consequences could never be repaired. The thoughtless riot, dissipation, and debauchery of his younger days produced fever and delirium. And then this produced a settled gloom, which in time developed a morbid insanity and finally terminated in a raving madness. That he's kind of, his debauched living as a youth was what made him insane, right? Or it kind of developed in him this monomania, which is a good 19th century, mad term that Poe used to love to use. It almost sounds like he's describing Roderick Usher in that little description from Fall.
A lot of Poe. I mean, Gogol too, the Diary of Madman, which comes out right around the same time. There is this kind of moment for this. The other thing we might raise here is, to go back a little bit to your questions about Rachel and how she's put forward. There is kind of a dark parallel to that version of the seduction plot being worked out here. It's interesting that they're put in such clear juxtaposition. And of course, we have this moment where they think that the wife is mad and he's sort of cackling to himself that, if only they knew, he's the one who's really mad. There's a sort of uncomfortable anticipation biographically there for Dickens with some of his use of mental illness rhetoric that's been uncovered around trying to institutionalize his wife. But here we have it as a kind of a I'd like to take it as a kind of a counterpoint to the sort of mean comedy previous chapter.
Well, it's also putting her in a complete victim position here, so we're still not seeing any kind of agency in any of these female characters. It's still a man's world, especially when they're insane and can kill you. But we don't get her perspective. We just get the madman's perspective. And it is that kind of telltale heart narrator, like, you think I'm mad, I'm not mad, let me tell you why I'm not mad. And and the black cat narrator at the end, how he's kind of like, oh, look how strong these walls are, and the cat reveals the body he's buried there. That kind of stuff shows up, but Poe knows Dickens really well. I mean, not only he meets him, right? He has 2 long interviews, and when Dickens comes to America in 1842, he comes to Philadelphia, and Poe he meets him probably at the United States Hotel where Dickens is staying. Poe just calls at him. It's like, oh, I'm going to go meet this. Poe's a well-known well-known literary critic, more known for that than his own fiction or poetry yet. But he goes and visits him. 2 interviews with him probably. But Poe has also reviewed Dickens's early novels. He reviewed the sketches, was in their kind of illegally printed by American publishers, by Carey, Lee, and Blanchard in Philadelphia. They published sketches by Boz as Watkins, Tottle, and Other Sketches, illustrative of everyday life and everyday people by Boz. Poe reviews that. He also reviews Pickwick Papers, when it's published also by Carey, Lee, and Blanchard in Philadelphia. He does this before he comes to Philadelphia. He's actually he's the editor of the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond, and it's a couple years before he comes to Philadelphia, 1836. Here's his review. It's very short, it's a little paragraph. I'll just read a couple sections of it, of Pickwick Papers. In our June messenger, we spoke at some length of the Watkins, Tottle, and Other Papers by Boz. We then expressed a high opinion of the comic power and of the rich imaginative conception of Mr. Dickens, an opinion which the Pickwick Club has fully sustained. Just now, however, we can only express our opinion that his general powers as a prose writer are equaled by few. The work is to be continued, and hereafter we may give at some length the considerations which have led to this belief. From the volume before us, we quote the concluding portion of a vigorous sketch entitled A Madman's Manuscript. The writer is supposed to be an hereditary madman and to have labored under the disease for many years, but to have been conscious of his condition, and thus by a strong effort of will to have preserved his secret from the eye of even his most intimate friends. And then he just republishes Madman's Manuscript as part of the review. So, and
interestingly, Poe twist on what it's a very Poe summary, isn't it? It's quite different from the one we get right after from the Dickens narrator's explanation of what's really been going on.
Yep. That Poe focuses on that preserving his secret from people.
Well, and in fact, Dickens's narrator, right, says that it's that monomania that drives him to madness, right? Yeah. He thinks it's the hereditary problem, but it's really his obsession. Yeah. Whereas for Poe, he really has been mad, and he's really, the madman's self-analysis is correct in Poe's analysis and Poe's reading of it.
Well, it should be like, well, he ends up, of course, Poe is very influenced by this, and perhaps this is a central story for him. But it's actually not so simple in a sense, because I think there's also a common denominator for both Poe and Dickens, and that's the Blackwoods magazine, which frequently has these kinds of stories with kind of narrators who describe a psychological condition while undergoing some kind of extreme situation, buried alive, trapped in something, they're mad. These are common stories in Blackwoods magazine over the years. And this is before Poe's. This is starts in 1820 or whatever, or even earlier for these kinds of stories. Dickens knows these stories well from Blackwoods. Poe knows them. Poe, and it influences both of them. And Poe, what I love, would both satirize these stories. He winds up having a piece that he eventually retitles How to Write a Blackwoods Article, and then writes one, and it's just it's a satire of what those kind of stories are. But Poe also would kind of pander to what those stories are like and write ones that really can appeal to people. But in the end, I think what Poe does is he writes stories that are a kind of brilliant triumph of them. Like he says, look how ridiculous these stories are. And then he'll write one like Tell to Heart a Black Cat, which is like, oh my God, that is such a great story. and you just used all the elements from that thing, and you were able to do a masterpiece. It reminds me of Shakespeare. It reminds me of Shakespeare in like Romeo and Juliet, where he spends the whole first, act of the play saying like, oh, romance, love, poetry, and all this stuff is so stupid, and then he like writes the greatest love poetry ever coming out of his characters' mouths. So Poe and Dickens are both very much influenced by this kind of Blackwood's magazine kind of story. And they're both in a cultural time when those kinds of stories are being developed and popularized. People have heard me, if you know me from Poe work, of course, Poe comes to Philadelphia, and then it really multiplies because Philadelphia is with Philadelphia Gothic, this is the place where he can really develop that kind of thing. But he does learn it from Dickens, and he does.
Well, it raises the interesting question too of the tone of this interpolation. I mean, it is internally, at least, it seems pretty deadly serious. But this is such a comic novel that its presence here makes it a kind of an interesting dilemma. Is this really just a horror story in the middle of this comedy? Is the fact of Mr. Pickwick trying to put himself to sleep with it sort of the joke that on which it all hinges? Mm-hmm. Or is there some way to read it as doing something satirical too, as well as that sort of obviously it's a sort of triumph of craft.
Well, if you can think back to the drunkard's death story, or the story that that Dismal Jemmy tells, there's no humor in that. Right. And this one, there doesn't seem to be any humor. I mean, I don't think it doesn't seem satirical, but it is, even when the stories still have the interpolated stories still have humorous elements in them. What I've noticed is that all of them in this, I think all of them, have this darkness about them or supernatural, that this is Dickens's idea of if you're going to tell a tale in the midst of things, it should have supernatural element or should be scary.
We are in an old coaching inn after all.
Yes. We're so they're the kind of stories you'll tell. And but there you go. So for people that noticed Poe in this, you noticed Poe in this. Poe definitely read this and took it. And of course, everyone, the greatest Poe Dickens connection is Dickens writes a novel called Barnaby Rudge, in which the lead character has a pet raven who called Grip. And Dickens himself, in his real life, owned a pet raven named Grip, and ravens can speak. They can say words. And not like a parrot. It's really weird. You ever hear a raven speak? It's like, ooh, because it sounds like a human being. They're really well able to mimic us. And Dickens it actually had more than one raven, but Grip died and he had him stuffed. And that stuffed raven Grip is now at the Free Library of Philadelphia. But it was bought by a Poe collector, Richard Gimble, who created this great Poe collection, which is now at the Free Library of Philadelphia. And he recognized that Poe read Dickens's novel Barnaby Rudge, in which he includes Grip. And at several moments in the narrative, people ask Grip a question, and Grip replies, "Nobody," over and over, hence nevermore. It's pretty likely Poe takes that as inspiration for his Raven poem. And so Grip is this great, the stuffed Grip, the actual Grip is this great kind of connection between Dickens and Poe studies. So all in Philadelphia. So the #1 Poe city. So, all righty. Anyway, so Mr. Pickwick reads the story, and then right at the end, his candle blows out, and light suddenly goes out, and then he goes to bed. And luckily, he's able to fall asleep. So, read a story because he was terrified. Reads a terrifying story, gets scared. I don't know. He goes to sleep. Well, after a hearty breakfast the next day, the 4 gentlemen sallied forth to Gravesend, followed by a man bearing the stone in its deal box. Pickwick even buys a box to keep it in. And then the end of this chapter is just what happened with his great antiquarian discovery. Pickwick lectures upon the discovery at a general club meeting. Presented it to the Royal Antiquarian Society and other learned bodies. There were heartburnings and jealousies without number were created by rival controversies which were penned upon the subject. Mr. Pickwick wrote a pamphlet containing 96 pages of very small print and 27 different readings of the inscription. 3 old gentlemen cut off their eldest sons with a shilling apiece for presuming to doubt the antiquity of the fragment. One enthusiastic individual cut himself off prematurely in despair at being unable to fathom its meaning. This is a great ending, right? Mr. Pickwick was elected an honorary member of 17 native and foreign societies for making the discovery. None of the 17 could make anything of it, but that all the 17 agreed it was very extraordinary. I mean, this is Dickens really taking the mickey out of these kind of societies that make so much over these tiny little discoveries, which they admit they can't really fully understand. They don't even have carbon dating back then, so they don't even know how old this is.
Thankfully.
Yeah. But then Mr. Blotton comes in. If everybody remembers, Mr. Blotton is the one who calls Mr. Pickwick's account, his presentation in the very first chapter. He says the word humbug. And then they have an argument, and then he says he only meant it in the Pickwickian sense, and everything is okay, but not this time. Blotton cannot, stand that this is happening, and he goes off and he journeys to Cobham himself, and he interviews the man who lived in the cottage where it was purchased, and that man denies the antiquity of the inscription, and then Blotton says, you know what the inscription says? It says Bill Stump's his mark, which it does. And there's, a mark, and then it says, but because the guy was illiterate, he didn't know his letters that well. He only put one L for Bill. So it's B-I-L, Stump's his mark. Read that little paragraph there. The Pickwick Club as might have been expected.
The Pickwick Club, as might have been expected from so enlightened an institution, received this statement with the contempt it deserved, expelled the presumptuous and ill-conditioned Blotton from the society, and voted Mr. Pickwick a pair of gold spectacles, in token of their confidence and approbation, in return for which Mr. Pickwick caused a portrait of himself to be painted and hung up in the club room, which portrait, by the by, he did not wish to have destroyed when he grew a few years older.
There we go. So, Mr. Blotton was ejected but not conquered. He also wrote a pamphlet. Several fresh pamphlets appeared. Foreign learned societies translated the pamphlets of the native learned societies into all sorts of languages. The Pickwick controversy continued. And to this day, the stone remains an illegible monument of Mr. Pickwick's greatness and a lasting trophy to the littleness of his enemies. I love that last ending there. So the illegible, we should all have an illegible monument to our greatness, right? That's what we all really need. So that is the true condition. That's a sign of the true condition of human beings, that we would have illegible monuments, so, to our greatness. That's it. That we end there. And are we good? Do we hit everything you needed to hit, Jake?
I think so. It's quite a diverse number, isn't it? I mean, it really.
We get a chase scene. We get Sam Weller and all his humor and his funny lines, and they'll return, and then we get this weird satire of antiquarianism, and then we get the Madman's manuscript, like just. And here's this. So Dickens just gives us. So I wonder if those pages exist for the manuscript. Only not all of the Pickwick manuscript, and it's all divided the world. But I would love to see that if it is kind of reworked as it's written, like it was written on the spot with the rest of the manuscript. So anyway, well, Pickwickians, thank you for joining us for number 4 of Pickwick Monthly. Jake, thank you for joining us on our Pickwickian travels. We'll see you in a few months. I guess you're number 4 in the slot now instead of 3 as you were before.
Sounds good.
All right, that's what we'll be. Coming up next month, everyone, we have issue number 5, chapters 12 to 14, in which Mr. Pickwick has an embarrassing encounter with his landlady, Mrs. Bardell, which will have serious ramifications later in the serial. And Sam Weller returns for good. Hooray. The Pickwickians visit the town of Eatanswill to witness a political election. And we hear the Bagman story about Tom Smart. And that's a good, there's a personal connection with me and Tom Smart. So some people know it. I'll make sure I mention it again next month. If you watch the show live, the best way to watch this show, note that we are in the middle of the month for the next episode. It happens on July 15th. So there's only 3 weeks in between this show and the next show. So again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel and like these videos. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. And your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections at the Rosenbach. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find more information at our website. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, and I'll see you all next month for number 5, chapters 12 to 14 of the Pickwick Papers. Bottle stands, pass it around, way of the sun, through the buttonhole, no heel taps. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye. See you, Jake.